It's a theological world, after all, after all, after all, after all.
Hello and welcome to It's a Theological World After All. Today we're talking about a different subject, namely, what is grief, mourning, memory, and the possibility of God? Here on It's a Theological World After All, we explore the deep currents beneath the surface of our culture, the ones that lead us back to God, theology, and the soul. Today we're joined by Mikolaj Slawkowski-Rode, a philosopher based at the University of Warsaw and the Ian Ramsey Center for Science and Religion at the University of Oxford. He works on questions at the intersection of personal identity, memory, suffering, phenomenology, and meaning. And so today we're glad to have him with us. Mikolaj recently wrote a widely read New York Times opinion piece titled, "It's Okay to Never Get Over Your Grief," where he asks why grief has become private, hurried, and forgotten in our modern culture. But what if mourning isn't a problem to solve, but a virtue to recover? What if grief is a portal not just into memory, but into transcendence? This conversation explores mourning, memory, ritual, the soul, and the ways we might begin to live differently by grieving well. So good to have you with us, Mikolaj. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Joshua. It's a pleasure to talk to you and an honor to feature on your excellent podcast. I just want to make one small correction. I stopped being affiliated with the Ian Ramsey Center after the end of a large John Templeton Foundation grant that I was working on science and religion. And I'm currently research fellow at Blackfriars Hall, but also at the University of Oxford. So
very good
positions, as it were. Or in fact, I've never stopped being a fellow at Blackfriars, but for some time I was affiliated with the Ian Ramsey Center as part of the grant.
That's right. Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, so you, Professor Mikolaj, did I pronounce your last name correctly? I don't think I've ever said your last name. Slawkowski.
Slawkowski-Rode.
Slawkowski-Rode. Okay, very good. Well, thank you for that. Yeah, we'll let's jump in, and first I want to talk to you a bit about what it means to be a philosopher, your vocation, to give us a sense of what you're doing, why this question that we're getting after really matters. So hopefully it'll build a kind of sense for why it matters. Now we're focusing on philosophy. You're a professional philosopher, right? And as I look through philosophy, the goal of It's a Theological World After All is really also pressing into the question of theology's relevance and theology's relevance in the modern world. As in my CT article, I discuss some of the reasons why there was a decline in a kind of sense or the significance of theology as a discipline. It's not even really treated as an academic discipline anymore in so much in the American context. And there's reasons for that. There's certain precedents historically and legally in American history for why that is the case and how that's changed the perception of the kind of mainstream culture around us. Certainly, Times Magazine, God is Dead, that movement had something to do with the kind of ripple effect that's had on culture. But I want to step back and think about philosophy with you, and tell me a little bit. When I think about philosophy, and I think when many people think about philosophy, they think of René Descartes, the great French philosopher, who I am actually very fond of, as you know. And I think much of his work is either underappreciated or maybe sufficiently appreciated but mocked, certainly in much of contemporary academic studies. He is the kind of whipping boy of many disciplines. But we can learn a lot from whipping boys. Yeah. So, but anyway, he gives us a kind of image of the philosopher's life. The philosophical life is kind of in his meditations, he's sitting in his recliner chair. You can picture him, and he's just thinking up all these great ideas. And somehow he arrives at all these exotic metaphysical conclusions about life from reflecting in his chair. By the fire, of course. So, but the kind of impression is that if you're doing that kind of work, what you're doing is really not all that important. It's really kind of irrelevant, right? You're not doing anything. You're not getting much done. What do you think about that? Tell us about your vocation, philosophy, and why you think it still matters today.
Well, first of all, Descartes, I think, really paved the way there for all of us to recline in our armchairs next to the fire for a living. That's been one of the most important achievements in the discipline to ever occur. But the relationship between philosophy and theology, I think, comes up very nicely in Descartes, because there's a way of looking at Descartes. In fact, he says it himself on numerous occasions, and this is something that is contemporarily mostly dismissed as just sort of pandering to the people that are in his world and reading him, and sort of reservations that he needs to make in order to be published. But he himself says, and I think there's a very good argument for taking what he says there seriously, which is that he wants to give a firm grounding to scholastic theology. He wants to rescue scholastic theology from the kinds of uncertainty that are beginning to creep in by the late medieval period and into the Renaissance. So he is interested in doing roughly what philosophers are doing now, and that is providing intellectual rigor an argument to some of the claims that are being made on behalf of theology. So a lot of philosophy currently is extremely dry and technical. But in a sense, all of philosophy has an element of supplying the intellectual, argumentative, and rational tools to analyzing a topic. So in a way, it's strange sometimes talking to people who don't read philosophy or are not interested in philosophical problems, because they want you to tell them, what does philosophy say? And on its own, I think philosophy doesn't really have many claims that it advances. So philosophy doesn't, for example, say, I don't know, there was a first event. Rather, philosophers ask the question, was there a first event? And give conditions for supplying answers one way or another, and analyze the structure of argument for looking at the problem of whether there was a first event. And so philosophy, before it became regarded as a handmaiden to the sciences, was, although no one really used that term openly, was regarded as a handmaiden to theology. And this is true not only in medieval Europe, of course, but it's perhaps even more true in Eastern traditions of thought, including Hinduism and Chinese traditions. Going back whole millennia, philosophers were trying to make sense of claims that were said to be revealed truth. And they were interested in how to reconcile that revealed truth, for example, with our experience of the world. So philosophers, in a way, don't really have an area of study that is proper to philosophy. They look at questions that are problematic in other disciplines and try to provide reasons and try to provide arguments that get us out of these difficulties, or give clarity at least to the questions that we're answering here. So that's partly why I'm interested in philosophy, of course, as well, because I was never good at any particular discipline, but I was quite good at seeing problems with claims being made, especially large sweeping claims being made on behalf of, be it physics or biology or anthropology or the social sciences, or in fact, various theologies, various theological outlooks. So that is, I think, what philosophy brings to the table, and that's how I understand my interest in it, primarily, in fact.
Good. Yeah. So let me ask a clarifying question to that. I think so many scientists of the day who are at least well read in philosophy, or scientists, or even philosophers themselves, who might consider themselves kind of more along the lines of some kind of broadly naturalistic perspective, they would say that philosophy still serves a purpose, but it serves primarily the purpose of clarificationism, right? Would you agree with that, or would you say that there's more to it than that?
Well, there's definitely a lot to that, sure, and I think that's a very important role that philosophy serves. But I would also say that it has a little more to add. It can speculate about, for example, the reasons that we have for wanting to clarify a certain issue. Why is it important to us to get clear on a certain problem? So I've, as you very well know, I've started this little society, the Humane Philosophy Society, that continues to operate on a very small but I think important scale. And
it's a great society. Yes.
And the goal of that little outfit is to essentially resist the resignation of many philosophers to these very technical and specialized areas of inquiry, where, for example, if you go into medical ethics as a philosopher, you're interested in problems concerning the administration and use of particular treatments, and you work with definitions of the patient and illness and all that, and try to get clarity on what works and what doesn't work in terms of arguments for or against a particular treatment, and why. And these can be very, very dry debates that are extremely far removed from things that we care about very simply when we're sick, or when we're dealing with something that threatens our life as an illness. And I think these broader and more fundamental questions that we face when, for example, again, in the area of medical ethics, we're faced with death, what is the purpose or meaning of life, or that sort of thing, then philosophy, I think, has a great deal to contribute in terms of looking at these questions that no particular discipline has the ability to address or answer. So I think there are two ways of looking at philosophy, and I think both are important. None is to be dismissed. One is a sort of a tool that provides internal clarity to a given discipline, and two, something that frames that discipline in a broader context of what I would call a more humane framework of meaning, in which we see ourselves as essentially the people who are engaged in that activity, and we try to ask the questions like, what is the end goal of pursuing that activity in the first place? Which, of course, you can't answer from just within that pursuit itself. Medicine won't answer the question why cure people in the first place. Physics won't, furnish us with the answers to why we need to know things about the universe, or about, the microscopic scale, the subatomic scale of the world we live in, since, we deal with chairs and tables and things like that. Why is it important for us to know about some of the things that we can't even hope to utilize in terms of technologies that we develop, or that? And I think philosophy is there to respond in some ways. These discoveries might change the way we perceive ourselves as inhabitants of that world, in the same way as the discovery of Copernicus, who saw that the sun doesn't circle the Earth, but the other way around, has precipitated a huge shift in our understanding of the place of human beings in the world. Not something that would come from the cosmology itself, but from putting that cosmology in the context of our broader understanding of humanity and the purpose of our life.
Yes. No, that's good. That's very helpful. Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Yeah, I think I think that's good. So philosophy certainly serves the purpose of clarification and generating the sort of bigger meta questions of why it matters, or why how to make sense of whatever the activity that we're involved in ourselves. So that certainly seems to be important. And as we look at the history of philosophy, or the history of, let's say, the history of the university and academic studies itself, philosophy has been around in terms of propagating or bringing about, at least conceptually bringing about, changes in the disciplinary discussions themselves, right? I mean, I think that's consistent with what you're saying. I mean, we originally began with philosophy, and then we entered into science and the different sciences that became specialized themselves with their own methodological tools that were helpful in sharpening or refining these more specific questions in the empirical realm. But it was really philosophy as a kind of organ that maybe kind of motivated that. I think that's what you're certainly getting after as well, right?
Absolutely. That's I think completely right. But I don't think that either side of the philosophical pursuit should be kind of diminished in terms of its importance. I think you can't really ask the large questions without a sufficient degree of clarity about what it is you're asking. So I think both levels or both dimensions are complementary.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's helpful. On the other side, in conversation with theology more broadly, in philosophy, at one level, at least you have the image of the one reclining in the chair. Today, when if I were to ask somebody on the street, what is a theologian and what do they do?
What answer would you get?
I think I think the answers might be a little bit more uncertain than the armchair thinker like Descartes. For today, maybe they would say, well, maybe it's some loud person at a podium preaching at me, right? Or they might say, they might say, well, it's somebody who just studies the Bible or something like that. Yeah, they study the Bible. If they know a little bit about a history, maybe they've thought about the great revivals that we've had historically in America, going back to the First Great Awakening with the one of our greatest thinkers, arguably, Jonathan Edwards, who himself was a churchman. I might think, well, a churchman, maybe a theologian is a churchman. Edwards was certainly a churchman who was doing all the kind of basic or mundane tasks of meeting with people, taking confessions. I don't know if he took confessions like a Catholic priest. Probably he did something like that. Meeting people, counseling them on their deathbed, catechizing them, catechizing young children and the like, and that sort of thing. Of course, Edwards was also a great mind who was a great philosopher, arguably, who thought ideas really do matter, and ideas maybe at some level do change the world around us. Yeah, so maybe we'll come back to that. I just want to set that out there to frame, but I want to enter into this discussion a bit more about the nature of grief, mourning, death. I haven't thought a lot about grief myself. You're forcing me to think more about it, so I appreciate that. I've thought about death, and those are two like closely related, at least in my experience. When somebody dies, or as I have a loved one right now, my father, who's he's aging, and he's not doing very well, and so it's in the experiential, like, close proximity. It's like it's coming, right? And I know it's coming, and so I've thought about death. I mean, as young as I'm not that old yet. I'm not that young either. But I think probably about death, maybe some would say a little too much. It's in the back of my mind pretty frequently. What drew you to write? Simple question. What drew you to write about mourning and grief in the first place?
Well, I think it was essentially the discovery that everyone who I read on the topic seemed to me to be fundamentally wrong. So I encountered at one point Freud's essay, Mourning and Melancholia. And I thought, well, this is there are some pretty interesting observations there. And there's lots of intuitively good stuff there, but fundamentally, of course, this is completely wrong, and I can go into why in a second. But then I thought, just as in most other respects throughout the 20th century, Freud has been mostly dismissed. Even people working in the Freudian tradition of psychoanalysis sort of see him as a founding father of the discipline, but himself mostly off on most of the things that he talks about. So I expected exactly the same thing with the question of what to think about mourning and what's the purpose of mourning in the face of loss. I thought this would be exactly the same. And to my surprise, this is not the case with that particular question. People seem to follow Freud in that almost to the letter in one very, very crucial point of what the purpose of mourning is. And so I suppose that brought me to try and do the philosopher's job of asking the right questions and providing clarification where it's needed in order to redress this balance. Because Freud, of course, completely does a 180-degree turn when it comes to the purpose of mourning. And this is something that is still very much misunderstood because of Freud, I think, in the contemporary world. So I have recently had the great honor of collaborating with some fantastic healthcare professionals working in clinical oncology, especially in terminal illness and end-of-life care. And in that particular context, it seems that apart from dealing with the death of patients, there's a host of other issues that are a part of their everyday profession, including death anxiety and emotional burnout from dealing with people who are suffering from potentially terminal or terminal illness. And it is there have been many studies showing that in such cases, and this is a very intuitive point to make, those who have religious belief are able to deal with those situations much, much better. People who are facing death or who are living through the death of a person close to them, if they have religious belief, they are somehow able to overcome the immediate stress and pressure of that situation on their individual life. And people look to Freud to provide the same relief for those who do not have religious belief. But I think the fundamental point I mentioned there is that this represents what religious belief offers to the believers. It's not the possibility to move on, essentially, and get on with your life in the face of loss or when facing a terminal diagnosis yourself. But religion does the exact opposite. It gives the promise of keeping the relationship alive and continuing it, although, of course, in a changed form after the person's death, and hoping, if you're facing death yourself, that the relationships you have with others will not be fundamentally and dissolved. So most psychologists working in the profession today think that what they're doing is providing in the secular framework, what religion offers, which is the ability to continue living, forming new attachments, new bonds, engaging with life as before. And Freud frames this in terms of course, his theory, so his sort of pneumatic theory of the ego, which is attached to another person, let's say in this case, and that attachment is a source of fulfillment for various desires that we have as human beings, and that only other human beings can fulfill. And once that person is gone, these desires are frustrated. And the process of mourning is, according to Freud, and according fundamentally, I think, to most of, there are notable exceptions, but predominantly in contemporary psychology and philosophy of grief in particular, the stress is on being able to grieve in a way that directs you to moving past those attachments that can no longer provide fulfillment, in order so that the fulfillment can come from new bonds that we form with others and with the world as well. And I think this is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the consolation of religion provides and where it comes from. In my view, and in the view of many theologians, some philosopher theologians as well, it is precisely the opposite. It is not that it allows us to be fine with it and kind of move on and say, oh, okay, our partner has died, and so I'm sure they're fine because of the afterlife, and therefore I can move on. They would want me to be happy, and therefore I can move on and create a new life with someone else that will be just as fulfilling. I think it's just the opposite. It's most religious believers will think that what the consolation of religion is that even in our new relationships, the people who we were attached to will still be present with us still, and that our relationship with them is not completely dissolved. And I think this is the dimension of the psychology and philosophy of grief that is almost completely lacking post-Freud in our secularized reality.
Yeah. No, that's very good. There's a lot there. Maybe we'll come back to some of those threads and pick up on them. I think, it's interesting that I think the what you brought up about Freud, as much as Freud is kind of like he's a little like Descartes in this sense, isn't he? He has a lot of ideas that at least are perceptibly wrong, but he certainly is a good interlocutor for thinking about these things, even if he is off on some things regarding the nature of grief. So we were just talking about the nature of grief, and you were talking about this sort of dialectic that you're having with both the religious side of grief that seems to be lost in much of contemporary practice, and as historically we move into more of a secular age. And you were interacting as well with Freud's discussion of mourning as kind of understood in terms of this sort of attachment theory. Is that correct? Is that the right
Yes.
understanding? And there's lots of threads to pick up on there. There's lots of rich thought. So we'll come to that. I wanted to step back real quick because it's really good to see you.
Very good to see you as well. Always a pleasure to talk.
Yes, it's good. No, it's good. I remember the last time I saw you, which was just a couple of months ago. It seems like so long ago right now, but also it seems like it really wasn't that long. So we were sitting and having nice drinks over the
That's true, yes.
Adriatic Ocean. Adriatic Ocean in Croatia.
Sea.
The
right.
sea,
Yeah.
the sea, yes, and the beautiful area of Tragir, and
that's right, yeah.
And that was a great time. That was during the Humane Philosophy Project summer school that you have, as the co-organizer, have organized and you oversee, which you've been doing for several years now, many years now. You guys have had a real successful
10,
go at it.
In fact,
10.
Yeah. So this is the annual event that the Humane Philosophy Society that I previously mentioned runs, and as you know, it's part of the Humane Philosophy Project of bringing people, mostly in philosophy, but also related disciplines like theology and psychology and literature studies and so on, together to talk about these big ideas that are very often neglected in all these disciplines. I think with the over-specialization in the universities, these sort of big questions, as I like to refer to them, are very often neglected. And so the purpose of this wonderful event, which it was a complete honor to have you at this year, is to bring various humanistic disciplines together to discuss questions at their intersection, but also questions that pertain to these big issues that are fundamental to our understanding of ourselves and the world.
Yes.
So I'm very happy that the event has been going for 10 years already. And I think, with the interest that we have, there are at least several more years that this will be attractive to many people.
Yes.
Until the humane revolution changes everything.
That's right. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. And I guess right now, presently, you are, and I didn't mention this, but you are actually in Budapest. Is that correct?
That's correct. Absolutely. I'm a research fellow here at an institution called MCC, where I'm in fact writing a book on love and loss, combining the topic or connecting the topic of loss to the topic of love and human relationships, particularly romantic love.
Very good. Very good. Does most of the literature on love get it right, or do they get it wrong?
Well, that's an interesting question. That's a very interesting question. So there is a lot of good and interesting stuff out there. What I'm particularly interested in terms of love is the debate between rationalistic pictures of love and more emotive pictures of love. Rationalistic pictures of love want to argue for the position that we have reasons to love, that love is reason-driven.
Yeah.
And this could be seen as something in the long tradition of arguments deriving from the kind of attitude taken by Plato in the Symposium, where he says, the ultimate reality of the transcendent world of forms is what gives us a reason to attend to someone in a loving way. It is through loving them that we express our love for the forms. And this model for love sort of reappears in terms of reasons that we provide or reasons that we can give for love being something worth pursuing. And of course, there's the other position which tries to see love as completely free of any reasons that we might have for it. It's an emotion that we feel towards the other person and therefore doesn't need any justification, as it were. It just happens. It gives us reasons in order to act in certain ways, yes, but itself doesn't have any reasons to begin with that motivate it. And so I'm interested in that debate, and I think there are attractive points on either side, and so I'm trying to, in a way, square the circle and have the best of both worlds. So that's the position I want to take on that. Yeah.
Well, very good. Yeah. Well, I'll look forward to more of that coming out. That's certainly relevant to this question here that we're looking at in terms of mourning. And so maybe we'll come back to some of that, but let's jump back into mourning. And you've been discussing Freud and the religious side, and I want to. I think you were gesturing in this direction already, so I want to ask this question. You've been writing on mourning. You obviously wrote this big New York Times piece that has gotten quite a bit of attention. What do you see? What are you noticing that is missing regarding mourning in the present discussion? Really, the question is, why did you choose to write it now? And because it certainly has had some kind of impact. It certainly has gotten quite a bit of attention. Part of that, it's quite obvious. The nature of death and mourning intersects with contemporary medicine and cultural perspectives on medicine right now. I mean, there's a lot of optimism around medicine. Since 2020, there's a little bit more pessimism as well. But it also overlaps with the religious side to some degree. I mean, at least some of the same religious questions and framing or perspectives that are at play, because it creeps into the area of death and, well, is there an afterlife? Consciousness also, it creeps into the area of consciousness, as we're seeing more of an uptick of interest in consciousness. And so at one level, quite obviously, it seems like a really important topic, but maybe you can say more about, why now? Why now?
Well, it seems to me that, there's something. So I think to come back to Freud for this, I think in a way it's unfair to blame Freud for all of it, because I think he was a symptom as well of a certain change rather than the place of origin of a development that we see in contemporary culture. And that is a development that focuses or justifies all of our actions in terms of our individual well-being and individual welfare. It's a shift, I think, from seeing the individual as part of a larger whole, perhaps a whole that is not only constituted by their immediate surroundings and the community that they live in, but also a larger community that includes, as Burke once put it, the dead and the yet unborn. And I think we've been in a move since the Enlightenment to find a justification for our actions in terms of their particular results, measurable results that we can refer to, has precipitated this focus on the individual as the be all and end all. So ethical theories, like Mill's, suggest that the fundamental grounding for any action is the individual suffering that can be brought about or prevented in a particular person. And so Freud tries to do exactly the same thing. He wants to make psychology into a rigorous science. He wants to do for the human mind what Darwin did for biology, and what Newton did for physics, and so on. Sort of give it a standard of quantification, as it were. And he moves very much with his times, and he thinks, well, the standard of quantification is individual psychology defined in terms of mental well-being or psychological well-being. And so he uses that lens to look at every situation that we're in and to quantify our method for addressing the problem defined in this way. So what he would say in the situation of losing someone is, well, this is something that puts stress on our individual mental health being or psychological health being, and the goal here is to reclaim that well-being. That's the final goal, and you can see this rationale, as it were, visible. Not only that's why I want to connect the topics of love and loss in this way, because you can see it both in terms of human relationships and in terms of these relationships breaking down. So as I like to say, mourning or your mourning is not about you. It's about the person you've lost, and focusing on your own psychological well-being sort of puts that to one side and makes you the focus of the emotions that you're going through, but also at the center of a profound, broader change in the way you relate to the world and understand yourself now that something that was really important in your life is gone. But we see that already in how we look at relationships. The term toxic relationship has made an incredible career in the 20th century, and people go to couples therapy. And usually what happens in couples therapy is people try to find ways in which, certain benefits that they had from being in the relationship and no longer have can be reclaimed. And a toxic relationship is one in which these benefits are fundamentally undermined. So we hope that our partners will make us more confident, or will make us, become our fuller selves, both professionally and individually. And if we can't see that happening, if we see that being in some way threatened, then we think, oh, I'm with a toxic partner because I'm not being enabled to do my best or do what I really feel I should be doing. And I think that's a bit of a wrong way of looking at it. Aristotle has this great point in he doesn't talk about romantic relationships. He talks about friendship, which to him is in a way more important. And he makes the very interesting point that in friendship, of course, we get benefits from having friends, and some very deep and important benefits. But if we seek friendship for those benefits, then we don't acquire friends. We're just, fooling people and using them. And if they were to find out, they'd obviously no longer be our friends. And there's a way of looking at the situation where we might say, there was never friendship there. There was just utilitarian use of the other person. And it seems to me in the way that we look at closer relationships, at romantic relationships, has fallen prey to that kind of utilitarian use. Of course, it's more subtle utilitarian use than just sort of, getting some tangible, more or less tangible benefit. But we still think that, if we're feeling ourselves to be suffering in some way in a relationship, then we should get out of it. We should sort of, get over the fact that there are some good things in it, but just notice that fundamentally there is this dimension to it which doesn't work for us. And I think that's, very closely connected with how we approach mourning as well. In that, biggest way in which a relationship can break down is for someone to die or in some other way become completely absent from our life. And so, of course, if we're looking at self-fulfillment in that relationship and our own flourishing in that relationship, then our natural instinct will be to move past it as quickly as possible and see, our suffering in the face of loss as pathological, something that is a hangover from a relationship that is no longer providing us the psychological benefits that we drew from it. So I think these are two connected issues, and I think that this is a very typically modern phenomenon where the focus on the individual and their well-being and from their own perspective trumps everything else in how we look at relationships and what happens to them.
Yeah, that's good. I'm as you were talking, I was thinking about several overlapping discussions that this is certainly relevant to in terms of our kind of modern breakdown of relationships in society. It overlaps with the question about the nature of goodness as well as happiness and how we're reconceiving and restructuring or reframing the discussion about happiness itself. I mean, happiness is relatedly to what you're talking about. Happiness now is all about me and what you give to me, the benefits you give to me, the goods. Oftentimes are even the goods themselves of what you provide for me are already situated in a context of a rich kind of market-driven, commercialistic, even materialistic and not in the technical sense of philosophy of mind, but in the cultural sense of some sort of happiness. So happiness is what matters about happiness more so now. At least this is the way it seems that we're primed. We are geared this way now. We're conditioned to think this way. Is that it's happiness is all about me and my happiness. I mean, even when I talk to, I'm a priest, and so I talk to families and I talk to parents these days, and I oftentimes get this answer of like, when I ask them, what do you want for your children at the end of the day? And oftentimes I almost without fail get this answer. I get this answer. Well, I just want them to be happy. And I think, well, yeah, what do you mean by happiness? I mean, well, the philosopher goes off in me, the little philosopher mind in the back of my head. What do you mean by happiness? What they typically mean by happiness through the course of the conversation is they want them to be kind of materially successful and, to have the creaturely comforts that come with modern society, the kind of, the relative kind of creaturely comforts that we now have that are they're in greater sort of mass than they were maybe in history past. But that becomes the sole kind of focus of what they mean by happiness. They want their individual child to be happy and to be comfortable and to have the creaturely material comforts that come with kind of a progressive Western society that is right and proper. I mean, in the middle class of America, middle to upper middle class, when we think of happiness, I mean, this is the picture that was given for so long. As a man, it might be, well, I want to marry the beautiful blonde-haired girl, and then I want to have 2.5 kids, and I want to have it in a nice big brick house with a white picket fence, and that was the image that was sold. And now we're feeding that even more in terms of our low-content culture. Since the early 2000s, I mean, you look at the kind of content that we're consuming. I mean, we are deeply consumers here, right? these images are constantly fed to us, but it's a feeding that's centered around almost solely me, you, YouTube, right? It's about me and my sensory goods that I can acquire for myself and amass. And I think this is all part. I wonder I wonder how this has deeply affected how it is that we approach the dead and the dying. I mean, now absolutely. when I think about my father, my parents, many people today in this cultural context, they look at their parents sometimes with disillusionment, sometimes with kind of with the breakdown, the fracturing of relationships. Many kids come from divorced families. And when they get old, their parents get old, there's no sense of obligation to them anymore to care for them or to be present for them. They're already disillusioned, and at this point in their parents' life, their parents are largely irrelevant and not really supplying much of good to them anyway. So why? Why, we should just, sounds really crude and crass and heartless, but I think there's a ring of truth in this. Why not just put them in a home and forget? So I can go on with my optimistic materialist life, my happy life, the happy life.
Yeah, I think there are a few good distinctions to be made there. So there's, of course, this egoistic theory where we sort of, if we undertake suffering for some reason, this is purely because, we can't get away from egoism. So anyone who accepts their suffering is, in fact, realizing some sort of benefit to themselves, some sort of psychological benefit or whatever. But I think there's a useful distinction to be made there in terms of pursuing your own happiness as a primary goal and pursuing something greater than your own happiness as a primary goal. Now, when you do the latter, I think you're not so much realizing happiness from pursuing that greater goal, because it's not happiness in the same sense as sort of, contentment with your life. Pursuing something that you truly believe in that conflicts with your own happiness might bring about, of course, a great deal of suffering and unhappiness. And so I think there's an imbalance there between, saying that, you get it all back because you clearly value the thing that you're doing more. Well, you don't value it in a way that it makes you happy, at least not in the same way, I think, as the happiness that you've given up to pursue that goal. And I think this is important because we have, it's for many now scandalous to suggest that there can be something more important than your own individual happiness. Happiness comes first. Without, it's like Maslow's pyramid. Happiness is at the very bottom, and only when you've achieved happiness can you sort of get going with the other things. And some of them might put pressure a little bit on your happiness, but in the end, you have to sort of replace the bottom layer with some form of higher fulfillment in order for your life not to just break down into bits. You need that level of happiness. Now, I think that's a very depressing picture of human beings, and one that we have amazing historical examples that give the lie to it. The easiest one, of course, are saints. Where they pursuing happiness, essentially their own happiness, was being dedicated to the salvation of humanity and others, something that brought them sufficient second-order happiness in order to replace the basic happiness for this all to make sense in the same way that it does for everyone else. I think it's a weird way of looking at it, and I think it ultimately doesn't work. And I think that losing this from sight and replacing just one-dimensional form of individual happiness for everything else that we could be achieving and doing is making our civilization very impoverished.
Yeah. Impoverished. Yeah. I think that's right. Yeah. It's making us impoverished. How so? Let's let's move into, in your article, you talk a bit about, and I think this is helpful. And you can bring sense and clarification if I'm to help make sense of what you're saying, what you're intending. But you talk about mourning as a kind of practice, I think. Is that right? A practice. There is something about the nature of practice that is important to a fulfilled, flourishing life that's not impoverished. And certain practices are needed for a flourishing society in this broader sense of happiness that's even bigger than me. Yeah. I think what are you describing when you describe mourning as a kind of moral practice? What do you mean by that?
So thank you. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I do mention quite a lot of things in the paper about what keeping the other person in our life might look like, what mourning without moving on might look like. And I give some even very trivial examples, like keeping a collection of potted plants that belonged to our grandmother going, or fixing up the clock that our grandfather never got round to fixing up, and so on. And there are, of course, other examples as well, bigger examples than just these individual rituals, if you might call them. We're just before Halloween, and that's not exactly what I would call a practice that keeps those who have passed away in our lives, and a sort of a ritual that can be included in the practice of mourning. But I say this from the perspective of a Pole. Halloween is a sort of a cultural intrusion from America into a space that was devoted to a very different ritual, which was the All Saints' Day, on which all Poles go to their loved ones' graves and clean up and put flowers and candles on the graves and stay for a prayer, and try in that one day visit as many graves of their ancestors as they could. It's a beautiful tradition that is slowly being challenged by Halloween, but nonetheless, this is something that definitely keeps the presence of the departed in our lives as something that is, part of the calendar and part of what we do. I've recently visited Georgia, and they also have an absolutely amazing practice of, especially in the mountains, of producing or erecting these little shrines to the dead wherever there is a mountain spring. And they put up a shrine with the pictures of their loved ones who have died, and make it into a spring, into a little water fountain from which passers-by can drink. And they leave cups for each passerby to refill and put on those shrines for the dead. More than that, many of these shrines have a little picnic area next to them, sort of a permanent fixture, a concrete or metal table that is there. And you can see that they often come and have a little celebration by the shrine. And very often leave little drinks apart from the water as a symbol of including their departed in their life. You can share your sorrows with the dead, and you can share your moments of happiness with the dead in that way as well. So I think, but what do all these rituals mean? What do they do? And I think they are a way of, as I said previously, of keeping those who we have loved in our lives. And of course, since they can't keep up their commitment in the same way, it is left to us to keep up that commitment to them. And that might mean different things for different people. But I think doing this is extremely important in terms of how we understand ourselves and our relationships with others. So there's a fantastic essay by Kierkegaard, the philosopher theologian. He has this book called Works of Love, and the final chapter is called The Work of Love in Remembering One's Dead. And he says something that to modern ears might sound completely outrageous, and that is that it is only after our loved ones or our beloved has died that we can truly express our love to them. And this is the final test of whether we've ever loved them in the first place. And Kierkegaard says this is why, it is because this is the moment when we can no longer have any benefits from having the relationship. We can no longer draw any satisfaction from the other person's presence, and it is completely up to us to maintain the connection with them and the relationship going, as it were, going in the sense of having their presence in our lives continue in some way, of course a different way, but nonetheless continue. And I think that all these rituals, traditionally provided, of course, by religion, were aimed at doing exactly that, to help us, to give us the tools, ritualized tools of continuing that presence. And without those rituals, it is really, really hard to think about ways in which, it's a very abstract thing to think about. Someone has died or has left us in some other way, lost at sea or whatever. We don't know what has happened to them. How do we think about what it means to keep them in our lives? What do we do without becoming kind of, morbidly sentimental about the whole thing? And I think one thing that religion has been able to do is to provide a framework within which we can express that presence in a way that does not invade our personal life and does not take over our personal life in this sort of, sentimental and morbid way. And that is something that is fundamentally important to our understanding of humanity and the values that we organize our life around, which include the commitment to others. And I think the rituals of religion, by making these public displays of that commitment, make it possible for us to essentially engage the dead back in our life, which otherwise, without these forms, becomes very difficult. I mentioned the potted plants and the clock. I think that they're still quite important things to not deny yourself. So there's a big push, I think, in modern psychology, for example, to advise people who are facing grief not to dwell on the material leftovers of a life with someone else, or a life that included the presence of someone else in it. So, oh, these plants that your grandmother had will only keep on reminding you that she's no longer there to water them. Give them away. It's an ersatz of her presence that will never, allow you to move beyond your dependence or emotional dependence on that person. Now, I think that's wrong-headed, but at the same time, I think that these private displays, or creating this space in your own private life for elements of the life that we had with the other person present there, is not enough, because there's the problem of the demarcation line, as it were. Where do we put the boundary on this? Do we include keeping the departed person's clothes in the cupboard? Surely that is something that is verging on the eccentric, at least. And so we long and we grasp for ways in which that relationship can be made meaningful in our life and not trivialized by these sort of gestures that grasp at the elements that have been left behind of the life that included the other person in it. And secular culture has not really provided an alternative for that framework that can allow us to maintain the presence of the departed in our lives. I mean, you've got these. There are some interesting developments that don't seem overtly religious. So, for example, there are these graveyards where people sort of keep someone's presence online after their death. For example, continue communicating on their blog, someone's blog, or the comment section on someone's blog becomes a way for a group of people who have been affected by their death to continue communicating. I think these are interesting developments. That if nothing else, they show our need for not just rapidly moving on and trying to create a life without the dependence on the other person, but the deep need to keep others present in our life. And I think, the rituals that religion provided, something like, the annual mass for the departed, and the various feasts that would be associated with different points in their life that we continue to celebrate. Many Poles, for example, use the opportunity of the name day of their departed, which is usually associated with the feast of a saint after which they were named. There's a birthday and a name day in Poland, and the birthday is pretty self-explanatory and the same as everywhere else. But the name day is a day which you celebrate in honor of the saint that you were named after. And many people use the opportunity of the name day of someone that has departed in order to remember them and meet people who knew them as well, and to remember the time that that person has brought the whole group together previously. So I think religion plays a role here which has not been possible to replace, and I think it's partly because this is a role that religion, that the role of religion has not been possible to replace, that we've shifted focus and decided, okay, well, obviously God is dead, religion is false, and it served this purpose, and therefore we should change our optics here and not look towards trying to find new ways of including those who have departed in our life, but rather of moving on completely and breaking these bonds and changing our life accordingly.
Yes. No, that's good. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing up the fact that tomorrow is we're entering into Halloween, and what we would historically call All Hallows Eve. So how fitting that we're talking about mourning and death. There's a lot of rich thoughts that you talked about there. So I think it's important to self-reflect on our own kind of ritualistic practices, and I often think of in our day and age where we are richly saturated with or permeated with various even I think secularly inclined practices that are effectively consumeristic and feed the sort of our self-serving kind of practices. Mourning and death kind of forces us to, in some ways, reconfigure when we're faced with the loss of a loved one. It forces us to reconfigure in terms of how it is that we prioritize our practices and the values that are latent within those practices. I think that's a really important point. It's something that touches the nerve of humanity itself, that even the basest or the coldest of persons often are rattled with the reality of the loss of persons, and the importance of memorializing their reality, their personal reality that they contributed to society itself. And I think that's really vital. That's really important. Yeah, you made some interesting comments about the nature of Halloween itself. Certainly, in our household, there's a lot that we try to memorialize and try to remember, and I think that's an important practice to be about. We might even think of it. It might even at first, if it might be hard to practice it if it's not practiced. You might not get the sense of it as being kind of, in a felt way, significant or important. I mean, certainly tomorrow on All Hallows Eve, we will have certain practices as we enter into All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day, to remember those who have come before us, those who have meaningfully passed and we've lost. My 6-year-old daughter, I mean, she these are kind of new practices for her. So her initial reaction might be that just this is kind of unknown to her. There's a disconnect. She doesn't quite get it. Although she's very perceptive. I mean, when it comes to the nature of death, I mean, this is not a topic that we shy away from when we talk to her. She's well aware of the reality of death and that we will all die, and that at least in our household, the sort of richer, meaningful framework of understanding and approaching death is within a kind of religious perspective, that there is a loss there, that there is something of a loss there that's important. There's a social structural thread that is pulled at when somebody's gone, especially when somebody's gone that is so close to you, maybe in your familial arrangement. There is something that is unsettling at a very minimum, but structurally there's something disruptive about it. And I think in the Reformation history, there's certainly in Reformation theology an emphasis upon death as a kind of as the kind of penalty of moral violation, right? So there's, in the Reformation theological tradition, in other traditions, they don't have this I don't think it's as pronounced. There's a sense in which when you come to death, Like, you really should be very sorrowful, not just because of what you've lost, but because there's something about the penalty that humanity has experienced, that there's a sting. There's a sting to death, and it's painful. And it's more pronounced when it comes with somebody who you've been close to. I think in the Orthodox tradition, you have something more like less emphasis upon that and the penalty, but you have something of a kind of a relational disruption that is pronounced in our familial life as well as ecclesial life, and those are both of those are to be remembered as valuable because they contribute something to the goodness and happiness, ultimately happiness of life itself. And so these practices are important. This is certainly something in this area that I'm trying to motivate as I lead people. We have very few ritualistic practices of the dead. Certainly around Halloween time, what's almost solely emphasized is the sort of macabre kind of horror of monster Hollywood monster reality, and that sort of certainly on Halloween, that certainly takes this sort of focus. I think there's something maybe to that to explore. I'm certainly there's several shades to death. There is a kind of horror, I think, to death that is I think is maybe unavoidable. And as we approach Halloween, I can't fail but bring up my favorite actor of all time, Vincent Price, the great patriarch of horror films. Are you familiar with Vincent Price? You must be. Yes.
No, I'm not, in fact.
Okay. Well,
if you give me a title, maybe this will ring a bell.
He's English. His films are often in England, and his films are. He is one of the patriarchs of horror. I mean, so the horror genre is largely, arguably, when we think of the horror genre, it comes down to a few different people. Peter Lugosi and Vincent Price and another gentleman that I'm forgetting his name right off the top of my head. But Vincent Price's films are often kind of consumed with death and the sort of what you described as the sort of eccentric side of death. But even more than that, the tendency or the disposition to preserve someone from death. So many of his films center around that theme of preserving the person from death. So you have, in different ways, different shades. You have The Wax Museum, which is a famous film, of course, preserving the dead by making them wax in a museum. You have Dr. Phoebes. You have The Mask of Red Death, and then you have the more recent film that I saw, which is an Edgar Allan Poe film, an Edgar Allan Poe story, which Vincent Price did a lot of kind of representations of Edgar Allan Poe in the story Morella, where the husband tries to kind of preserve the body of his bride that was taken from him suddenly, too early in life. He preserves her body in this cave-like setting. And in the cave-like setting, there's this water that seems to regenerate her body, and so her body stays preserved as like a mummification process, right?
Yeah.
And so there's a fixation on that. I think the aspect of horror in death, is that something certainly I think it's important to thinking about here as we enter into the eve.
Oh, absolutely. There's several things that I want to say to this. One is, of course, that's precisely the wrong kind of way, mentioning those horror films, preserving the body, the wax museum. It's partly because of this, transformation of our looking at death in terms of the horror of it. That has generated, I think, or reinforces this idea that preservation in the face of death is extremely important. You've got these millionaires in Silicon Valley employing whole platoons of doctors that guarantee them that with a certain diet and exercise routine, they will not age and live to 150, by which time the immortality machine will be discovered. But keeping the relationship with a person who has died alive is precisely not like keeping a wax figure or keeping their body animated. Obviously, that presence of someone in your life will be profoundly different. Obviously, you're not going to be able to hang out with them because they're no longer there. And so the idea in maintaining bonds or continuing bonds is that precisely that of transformation and not of literal holding on to certain elements of their life. That I would argue is a touch macabre, at the very least.
Yeah.
So I would definitely agree with that. Now, there's another point that I wanted to make in connection with this, and that is that this is sort of balanced out. On the one hand, there's the sort of macabre side of death, the zombies and the werewolves and everything else. Creatures that pretend death that we must escape. And on the other hand, there's even in much of Christianity, there has been this shift towards a kind of more optimistic look at death. So these things sort of run in parallel. On the one hand, there's this sort of horror and revulsion towards death. And on the other hand, there's this, I think, deepening trend in Christian churches of looking at death as something that we shouldn't really worry about at all. This is, in fact, in some extremes, a happy event, because the person who has died is now in a much better place, and therefore we should rejoice. And there's a fantastic paper in a collection of essays that I edited, which you haven't mentioned yet, unforgivably, yes. And so I will.
I'm sorry. Yes,
this is.
I was getting to that.
That came out with Roman and Littlefield a couple of years ago, called "The Meaning of Mourning," and in that book, there's a collection. It's a collection of essays with contributions from philosophers, theologians, medical practitioners, but also artists and writers. It's a very interesting book, and one of the essays there is written by Father Richard Conrad from Blackfriars at Oxford, where I mentioned I'm currently a fellow, and he compares the old and the new liturgy for the dead in the Catholic Church. And he notices that post-Vatican II, the new liturgy for the dead has almost completely de-emphasized something that was present in the old liturgy, which was an element of outrage at what has happened and an expression of, faith, but lack of understanding, and more importantly, lack of acceptance from the believers of the fact that God allows this, that part of our life involves death and the loss of those close to us. And this has almost entirely been purged from the new liturgy of the dead that emphasizes, happiness and prayer for the dead in heaven where they now are. And Richard Conrad makes the point that this kind of completely glosses over an extremely important element of human experience when it comes to the place of death in our life, which is that we don't naturally accept it. We don't naturally, greet the death of our loved ones with happiness. We fear the moment ourselves because, we worry, for example, about, even if we believe in the afterlife, whether or not certain values that we're able to realize here, won't be lost in a very permanent way. And so, this is certainly something that, at least in the metaphysical picture offered by Christianity, is not a necessary element of our existence. Adam and Eve didn't have it, right? So it is a bit of an outrage, you might say, and something that should rightly cause outrage, that we are in this situation. And so the moment where someone close to us dies, or where we're facing our own death, is a moment where we quite rightly, although we shouldn't perhaps lose our faith because of that, at least if we're Christians, but at least this is a moment at which the limits of our understanding for God's reasons for this are reached. This is therefore rightly something that we should be pushing back against. And Richard Conrad makes this absolutely amazing point in the essay, which I love, which is that it seems impossible that God might want it any other way. Not that we die, but that we're outraged at death. Even though this is something that we do because our understanding of the situation is limited, we would be less good if we accepted it without any qualms, and if we just sort of approached the situation with a sort of mindset of, oh yes, God has got it, fine, excellent, moving on. What's next? So even though our attitudes in that moment don't align with the ultimate reality, or with the truth about our being because of our lack of understanding, God, Richard Conrad suggests, doesn't want them to align, because this is a testament to a very important element of humanity, which is the connection that we have with an ability to invest deeply in other human beings, and share a life together. And so outrage is absolutely the appropriate response. And even though from God's eye perspective it might look like a mistake, this is a mistake, Richard Conrad argues, that God wants us to make, and expects us to make. So I think that's a very, very interesting argument, and I think that in light of that, it sort of gives a little bit of an insight into this bifurcation of the attitudes to death and dying that we see, with, on the one hand, the sort of Hollywoodized horrific visions of it on the one hand, and on the other, the sort of very, very joyful approaches developing across Christian religions that emphasize how good it is that this has happened, both of which seem to be leading us in different ways in wrong directions.
Yes, that's good. Yes. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And I should say that compilation on Mourning, the Roman and Littlefield, is an excellent, rich compilation of some of the finest esteemed philosophers in that collection. It's a great collection.
And
for the academics, it's certainly, you need to pick it up. And for the non-academics.
and for the non-academics,
For the intellectuals, absolutely.
Now that Roman and Littlefield has been bought by Bloomsbury, the paperback is going to be coming out with Bloomsbury, hopefully sometime in the first half of 2026.
So it'll be extremely cheap.
Oh
and
yeah,
affordable.
absolutely.
Yes.
Be able to pick it up at JFK when flying to London, and vice versa.
That's right. Yeah, just skip a couple of McDonald's meals, and you could probably purchase it.
Fantastic read.
Yes,
for
that's good.
The flight over.
That's right. Yes. No, great. Yeah. Well, I know there's so many threads we could have picked up. There's so many topics I wanted to talk about, like nostalgia and the importance of memory for those that are on their deathbed, and mementos that help dementia patients on their deathbed, and the importance of. I have somebody I'm working with who we're working on a project together. She is a musical therapist and a chaplain, and she goes and meets with dementia patients, and she plays music, but she doesn't see it. She sees it as a deep kind of ritualistic act that actually, at some point, when she's playing throughout, she doesn't notice anything happening in the patient, but oftentimes at some point toward the end, they light up in ways that you wouldn't expect because they remember, or something in the music makes them alive. So I know we're getting close on time, so I want to bring this around just a few minutes to bring it to a close, to think about a couple of things. Maybe this will be our closing question. As we think about mourning and grief, I like to think about and move toward this question of transcendence. And I think as we think about the split between the two extremes, I mean, you mentioned the obvious extreme of the macabre sort of horror. There is a reality of death that is horrifying. So there's something there to think about and why that's wrongheaded. And then on the other side, in my particular context, this happens quite often now, where I go to a funeral, especially in a Christian context, an evangelical context, and the whole service is about remembering and celebrating the life. And it's almost this, it's completely optimistic, and everything's fine and dandy. It's like, no, somebody just died. This is awful, right? That seems to miss the point as well. We've talked a lot about the nature of what we've lost and whether or not secular practices can actually reclaim or give us what. And this is a larger question in a lot of discussions taking place right now, whether or not secular perspectives can supply something that is sufficiently parallel to religious practices, historic religious practices. So with that, I think, what do you think grief can do in terms of deepening our moral and spiritual perception, if in fact there is such a thing as moral and spiritual perception?
Yeah, sure. I think obviously there is. Definitely, any believer will tell you that there's spiritual perception, and anyone who at any point in their life saw anything that they thought was wrong can testify to the fact that they have moral perception, obviously. And so I think both of these are important in the phenomenon of grief and essentially how we experience and approach loss. And one thing I want to say is that, of course, not everyone not everyone believes. And for those who do, then transcendence, or the ultimate reality to which we properly belong, is the framework within which the whole discussion takes place. This is not something that we have immediate or direct access to, but this is something that at least provides a frame of reference for our understanding. Limited understanding, of course, as I mentioned, in context of the new and old liturgy of the dead, limited understanding, but at least of our place in the larger scheme of things. Now, for the non-religious, I think there's also that kind of frame of reference, and I think that frame of reference needs to, if it is to successfully, give meaning and value to the way we understand ourselves and our place in the world, needs to be bigger than just ourselves.
Yes.
So it needs to go beyond just our immediate needs and pains, and put us in a context that we can understand as larger in terms of the meanings and values that we organize our life around. And
Yes.
I think this is, some people believe in humanity or democracy as values that are worth giving your life for. But I think what we're missing here, in a way, or something that is often lost in the secular context. In the secular context, what is missing is that a broader frame of reference that furnishes our life with value and meaning just beyond our own personal needs. And so you can point to various things that have been accepted as something that, for example, sacrificing your life is worthwhile, humanity as such, democracy, or whatever. But what is often forgotten, I think, at least in the secular context, are other people, the people we have immediate relationships to around us. And so I think this is a bit of a middle ground between these abstract ideals that, in a sense, are aimed to, or thought of very often as, replacing the transcendental reality that religion emphasizes. But religion does not forget about the connections that we have to other people and how these are important for our existence. Whereas the sort of individualistic framework within which there might be values where individuals are justified in risking their life, often does, for some reason, forget the fact that other people are so important to exactly that aspect that we're looking for, the broader framework that provides meaning that we can appeal to, that is larger than ourselves. When we make sacrifices, we usually make sacrifices directly for the benefit of other people and not some abstract idea. And even when we're thinking about some sort of abstract idea, like, for example, democracy, it is because implicit in that idea is the benefit of others. So I find it quite strange that in the secular context, at least, there's less and less place for our immediate relationships with other people being so important to our understanding of our own life, and hence, the phenomena that I'm interested in of looking at grief as something that is supposed to restore your psychological well-being, and loving relationships as well as something that is supposed to buttress or hold up your well-being. And if it fails at that, it has become toxic and unmanageable.
Yeah. That's very good. This has been a very good discussion, very rich discussion. So that's a good note to end on. Grief isn't just a glitch in the system. It may be one of the most human, most spiritual acts we have left. In a culture that races past loss, that numbs itself with distraction, today's conversation reminds us there's wisdom in sorrow, there is hope in mourning well. As Professor Mikolaj shows us, to mourn is to remember, but it's also to remain open to the mystery of life, to the soul of the other, and maybe to the voice of God. If this episode stirred something in you, share it with someone who's grieving. Take heart. The tears of the saints are not wasted. They may be the seeds of a more honest, more beautiful world. Thanks again, Professor Mikolaj.
Thank you, Joshua. Very, very good to talk to you, and hopefully till next time, and in not too long.
Yes, exactly. Till next time. Thank you.